and welcome to this week's Hippie Hyena. Before we begin, just a bit of bookkeeping. I see that I've got a few new subscribers this week, which is very nice. Thanks very much for joining me on this little journey that we'll take together. You're all very welcome. Now, you've seen the intro, you may be thinking that this week is going to be about Michael Gove, but in fact it isn't. I just thought the footage was funny and I wanted to put it up there for no particular reason. Anyway, so this week is actually going to be about Paul Joseph Watson, who we've covered before, and this week he's having a kind of hissy fit about immigration, as is his wont, as is his major bee in his bonnet, really, is about immigration. So let's see what kind of thing is getting him all worked up.
The Taliban takeover of Afghanistan means that Europe is now facing the risk of another refugee influx. How it started, how it ended.
Yeah, that just seems like a bit of a funny way of putting it, doesn't it? I think it's sort of more that due to America and Britain's absolutely thrashing of Afghanistan over a several year period, there's bound to be people who are unhappy about that and want to leave, putting the emphasis on the Taliban takeover as if it just sort of happened magically without sort of, the generalised founding, funding and arming of the Taliban in the first place years ago by Western powers, the sort of trashing of the country's infrastructure and then buggering off without sorting it out, which was largely orchestrated by Trump. That'd be a slightly more accurate way of putting this sequence of events.
This has brought the hashtag refugees welcome crowd out in full force once again. Because it went so well the first time.
Yeah, it went fine. Absolutely fine. This is the thing that Paul Joseph Watson and his ilk like to do. They like to sort of vaguely allude to something being bad without really saying why. It's because their target audience already knows why. The reason is racism. But he's sort of, if he just blatantly said that, I didn't like it because I didn't like brown people, and there being lots of brown people around, and immigration might bring brown people. If he just said that, he'd probably get demonetized and kicked off YouTube and other platforms that he probably already should have been kicked off for, really. But this is their way around it. They don't say specifically what the problem is. They just say, it went badly before, or, sarcastically, it went so well before, but without saying why he thinks it went badly, because he can't. And, I've got to say, he's a pretty weird guy. Imagine, spending a lot of your time having to sort of vaguely allude to what you think without being able to just basically say it, because what you actually think is so heinous and disgusting that if you were to voice it out loud, you'd be kicked out of polite society almost immediately.
Seems to be overwhelmingly young men. Don't see many women or children, but I suppose they're all doctors or lawyers in waiting, so why should we concern ourselves?
Yes, exactly. Why should we concern ourselves? I literally don't care. In fact, I care a little bit in the other direction, because I think it's a good idea if our country has made a lot of money, and it has, by decimating another country. We need to sort of tidy up the mess that we left, and part of that is accepting the humanitarian issue of bringing in people, and who cares if they are all men? So why should I care? Who gives a shit? That sounds pretty sexist there, Paul. Again, vaguely alluding to some sort of problem without saying what it is. You see, because what he's actually saying that it is he's trying to imply that these people are terrorists who have been sent in by the Taliban or whoever to in some way subvert or miscegenate our pure white Western culture. But he can't say that out loud because for obvious reasons, because it's stark staring bonkers. So instead he'll just sort of hint at it in this sort of like oddly jokey tone, but he's sort of doing this sort of constant rib nudging, like aye, jokey, aye kind of tone, and it's like, where's the joke here, Paul? You're just euphemistically being racist. That's not a joke. It's not humorous. It's just you being a dick. His whole demeanour is just so sort of a kind of throwback to the 90s. It's sort of like this FHM magazine kind of self-consciously laddish, pretentious nonsense. It's like, for God's sake, it's so boring and farty. It's the sort of behaviour you can imagine from, like, if you go on like a stag do with an old friend from college, and he's brought along someone that he knows, probably from work, and they work in some boring office somewhere. Nothing wrong with that, but this guy doesn't seem to understand that it's really boring and is somehow weirdly immune to Marxist alienation, and he thinks he's hot shit, and you basically spend the entire weekend trying to avoid him as he kind of jokes around whilst trying to nudge people in the direction of hiring prostitutes or something. That's where my imagination goes when I hear Paul Joseph Watson talking. And then when you come home after the stag do and your girlfriend says, "Oh, did you have a nice time?" And you said, "Yeah, it was quite nice, but there was this absolute dickhead there, my God." And then you speak to your friend about it, whose stag do it was, the one who was getting married, and he was like, "Yeah, I kind of had to invite him because he kind of overheard me inviting someone else." And yeah, and then sort of by a sort of process of an elimination, you just start to figure out that actually he's quite a desperate figure who doesn't really have anyone in his life who can stand to be around him for more than a few seconds, or if they're sort of forced to be at work, which is probably why he likes working in a boring office, because people are forced to talk to him. Then probably later on he'll get fired for some kind of sexual misconduct, like artlessly hitting on some girl way out of his league and then being reported to HR or something.
Humanitarian development worker Sybil Schneehager told German WDR television on Sunday, quote, "We can assume that up to 3 million Afghans will make their way to Europe in the foreseeable future." Well, what's another 3 million? Get ready to see European cities put up more refugees welcome posters a stone's throw away from diversity barriers. Get ready to be culturally enriched.
Ugh, this sort of culturally enriched thing. The reason he's saying that is because he's sort of trying to be sarcastic and snarky about the way that some people who are pro-immigrant have talked about people coming in from other countries enriching us culturally, which he is sort of using as a euphemism here for essentially cultural degeneration, I suppose. It's more nakedly racist. That usually they will sort of talk about like economic issues, but you know what we've seen as is in effect stultifyingly obvious, that when you bring more people into a country, you've brought more customers in, so what you can expect to see is an economic net benefit. And that used to be the thing that they would complain about. They'd go, "Oh, look how it's going to damage our economy." But that's basically been proven now to be abjectly and obviously false, as everyone who had half a brain would predict it would be. So they've kind of let that one go, and now they're sort of talking vaguely about cultural enrichment, or in sarcastically they're saying that's to mean sort of cultural degradation in some way. But the thing is, what if this is totally undercut by is the issue that it's Paul Joseph Watson saying this. Like, if there's anyone more culturally degenerate than Paul Joseph Watson on this planet, I would be absolutely staggered. I mean, the way to make me fear a cultural effect from immigrants is if they show that plane and instead of being filled with a bunch of quite shell-shocked looking guys with brown faces, I would, if it was like a plane filled with clones of Paul Joseph Watson, or sort of, it would make it even worse if there was a sort of a sound recording of it too, or even video of them all sort of chitter-chattering away over each other and not listening, and kind of all sort of trying to one-up each other with how sort of snarky and rib-nudging they can sound whilst having no snarky or rib-nudging, like, commentary or content underlying that delivery style. You know, that would be unbearable. If I thought there were a horde of Paul Joseph Watsons coming in, I'd be like, for fuck's sake, close the gates. Stop the planes. We don't want any. I mean, we don't even want the one we've got. Please bring no more. That would be the cultural effect I'm scared of. A bunch of Muslims, like, who gives a shit? Because largely, the cultural problems that we've got are already here. And they're from people who are have been here for a really long time. Because the sort of values that I care about, they're not connected to race. Imagine that. And to be honest, if there's anything that's going to reassure me about the type of person that will be coming over here in these immigration waves, it's going to be if Paul Joseph Watson doesn't want them to come because he thinks they're going to water down or degrade our culture. That makes me think, yes, please, let's bring more, because I really want the culture that Paul Joseph Watson is a part of to be diluted to the point that it doesn't exist anymore. That sounds awesome.
But once again, the facts contradict the narrative.
What narrative? Think about this. He hasn't presented anything of the other side, at all. There's been absolutely no narrative expressed that any fact could contradict. As yet, from him, we're yet to hear it.
Afghanistan will probably be more stable under the Taliban than it has during any time in the past 20 years.
So? Why does he think that's important? What? Oh, stability is what's important. Yeah, and all of the sort of various types that the Taliban sort of disapprove of homosexuals, women, atheists, whoever else, when they're being horrifically oppressed and in some cases even imprisoned and I'm sure executed, they can feel safe in the knowledge that their oppression, imprisonment and execution was done stably. It was a very stable oppression that they were suffering under. When their sort of wives and children, our daughters, are being taken to be raped and handed to Taliban soldiers, as they have done in the past, as just essentially sex toy playthings. When that happens, fathers, I'm sure, can be happy that at least that's happening stably. A very stable environment to live in. And you can be, very stably dead. In fact, to be dead is probably about the most stable you can possibly be, because it's not like you're going to change from that position. So, maybe that's the solution there. That's the solution that Paul Joseph Watson would probably prefer. In fact, I probably shouldn't mention it, so I probably shouldn't give him any ideas. Absolutely ludicrous and idiotic analysis there from an absolutely ludicrous and idiotic person. So that's exactly what we can have come to expect from this level of discourse. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this week's Hippie Hyena, and I'll let Michael Gove play us out with a delightful little dance number. Goodbye.